So the story is actually loosely based off of two books by English writer Mary Norton. And the very first book was called The Magic Bedknob, or How to Become a Witch in 10 Easy Lessons, which was written in 1944. And the next book was called Bonfires and Broomsticks, which was written in 1947. And Walt Disney bought the rights to the first story in August of 1945, and the two stories were combined in 1957 to become Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Now in 1961, Disney was in negotiations over Mary Poppins, so definitely check that video out because we covered a lot of the history in regards to that and how there's lots of contentions with it. But as a backup, he ended up getting the Sherman Brothers to begin working on a project. And so later, the Sherman Brothers ended up holding a story conference with producer Bill Walsh and with writer Don DeGrady. And this was the first time that the song Eglantine was sung. Now during the conference, just as a little side note, Walt Disney, he ended up falling asleep. And this is where Don DeGrady, he ended up doing a quick sketch of him. Although unfortunately, thus far, I wasn't able to find any picture of it. If I'm able to find it later in the thing, you'll see it. If not, then there's a reason for that. So of course, Mary Poppins ended up being picked. And so as a result of this ended up being put on the shelves until 1966. And in 1966, this is where they changed the title of it to The Magic Bedpost. However, they decided not to run with this, and the main reason was because this plot here was just far too similar to Mary Poppins, so as a result, this ended up being shelved once again until 1968. So in 1968, the Sherman Brothers' contract was set to expire, but they still came together with Bill Walsh and with Don DeGrady. So even though there was no hope of this film being put into production at this point, they still revised the storyline to try and make things happen. And the following year, 1969, it finally ended up being okayed, the production of it started, and in 1970 to 1971, the Sherman Brothers reworked the story and they also put in the song Beautiful Briny Sea, which was originally meant for Mary Poppins. So that explains the story of the creative process that went into the making of the film, but now we have to start talking about the story of the studio. So filming of this actually took place between March and June of 1970 and was mainly done in the Burbank Studios in California. And only some scenes, in particular the ones of the shots of the castle, that was done in Dorset. But it should be noted that the filming of it actually took just 57 days. So this is with all the different actors. But the animation took up to 5 months. And obviously, like we said before in previous videos where you talked about a live action film with animation in it, it takes a while to kind of merge the two things together. And actually, once again, they used the sodium vapor process within this film. And in particular, it was used for the football match, which was on the island of Naboo. However, there ended up being a lot of inconsistencies with this. And Milt Cole, who is of course one of the chief animators, he was really unhappy with how this was turning out. And so as a result of this, Ward Kimball ended up having to put in a lot of special effects, which meant that the entire film had to be storyboarded in advance, shot by shot, which caused Angela Lansbury's acting to, in her words, be very much by the numbers, which meant that her and the other actors basically had to do a lot of acting to pretend that these things were on screen, and sometimes it didn't always necessarily work out. So that leads us on nicely to the casting for this. So the role of Eglantine was played by Angela Lansbury, as we've just said, but originally she had wanted to be in Mary Poppins, but obviously Julia Andrews got the role for that. However, in the case of this film, Julia Andrews did not want it because she kind of hesitated. And so as a result of this is why Angela Lansbury ended up being picked for this. Next is the role of Emilius, and he is done by David Tomlinson. So he, of course, is the dad in Mary Poppins, so he's great in that. And originally they were actually going to have Ron Moody being the role for this. So if you've ever seen the film Oliver, he is Fagin within that. However, Ron Moody, he basically was like, the budget is not high enough, you're not going to pay me enough to be in this. So he walked away from the project. So as a result, David Tomlinson ended up taking this role anyway. And actually, I think that, David Tomlinson probably did a better job than he necessarily would have done. Next, you have Roddy McDowall, who is Rowan Jelk in this. And he also appeared in the film Longest Day and also within Bug's Life. You also have Sam Jaff, who is the bookman, and he appeared in Ben-Hur. You have Hank Warden, who is one of the old Home Guard soldiers, and he appeared in many different John Wayne films. And you also had Reginald Owens, who is the Major General in this, but in Mary Poppins, he is Admiral Boom. And then finally, we have to talk about Bruce Forsyth. So anyone from England will obviously know him because obviously he's absolutely like legendary guy. He passed a few years ago, and his catchphrase was "nice to see you nice." He's in this film as Swinburne the Spiv, and I think that he plays an absolutely brilliant role. And it's actually quite interesting because I would never think that Bruce Forsyth could actually act, but in this he plays a very convincing role. And then, of course, you have many other actors as well. Like, I didn't even mention the children, but none of the other people were in anything notable, so it's not really worth speaking about it. I mean, even Carrie within this, so she is the girl. She appeared in EastEnders very briefly for a few years in the 90s, but other than that, it's very minor characters, but still, they contributed to the making of this great film. So that covers the story of the studio. And now we have to talk about the themes and the history. So in terms of the history of it, and obviously, talking about the themes, it's obviously set in World War II. At the time when the first book was written in 1944, World War II was still going on. And so the whole mindset of people at that time, especially in England, was very much shaped by that. So you can see multiple references to that, whether it's, evacuees and this, etc., etc. So it's actually quite a good reflection of what everyday life was like for ordinary people living throughout the war. How, the life of the children's completely disrupted because they had to leave London to go and live there. And also as well, of course, the Portobello Road scene is an absolutely brilliant demonstration of what England was like at that time, as well as many different people from across the empire. So you have Scots, you have Indians, you have Caribbeans, you have many different people from around the empire who were there at that time, obviously in service to king and empire. So that's something which is quite unique and stuff. And I think if the film was made nowadays, you might not necessarily have had such an emphasis on that. And I think in particular, the very overt patriotic nature of the film. So you have obviously the Portobello Road scene, but in particular the final scene where you have the animated armoury. So this is where you have troops from all across British history coming once again, almost rising from the dead to fight the Germans. So that scene there is very, very patriotic. And in particular, Eglantine's line in that, which is "Victory for England and St. George!" which of course is very patriotic. And I don't think that nowadays, if they were to make this film, I don't think it would have so many patriotic overtures. But of course, films from the 60s and 70s, etc., still many of the people who were in this film, they would have lived through the war, many of them would have served through the war. So it obviously would have played a much bigger part of their psyche than it would people in today's audiences. So that's something to really note with regard to the themes and the history of it. So that covers that part of it. And now we have to talk about the legacy of the film.